All right, so you're researching air filtration systems,
Mm-hmm.
which, honestly, who isn't these days? We found this awesome YouTube video comparing Baghouse and Cartridge filters.
Okay.
And then it does a pretty good job of breaking things down.
Yeah,
But, you know, us, we got to go deeper,
of course. Always got to go deeper.
especially with all those research papers you sent over.
Yeah,
Ready to get granular.
absolutely.
One thing that really stood out to me was
Yeah.
how the video kind of glosses over the whole particle size thing.
Oh, yeah. That's super important.
Right. Like, it mentions baghouses are good for heavy dust,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't really explain why.
Well, and that's where those research papers come in.
Yeah, like that report on the cement industry.
Right.
It showed that, like, a huge percentage of their dust is these big, chunky particles.
Yeah. And that's where baghouses really shine.
Exactly. It's not just about heavy dust in general.
Right.
It's about the size and the nature of those particles.
Exactly.
And then on the flip side, the video mentions cartridge filters being better for fine dust.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this one study here on pharmaceutical manufacturing
Okay.
that argues even fine dust needs a nuanced approach.
Yeah, and that's often overlooked.
It is. So it's like saying cartridge filters are good for fine dust is only half the story.
Right.
The real question is, how fine is your dust?
Exactly. We need to look beyond just the basic filter type.
Okay, so we're not just talking about baghouse versus cartridge.
Right.
We're talking about the filter media itself.
The material. Yeah.
Because some materials are better at trapping those ultrafine particles.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're talking serious filtration power here.
Yeah.
But how does all this translate to the real world?
Well, let's take a woodworking shop, for example.
Okay, the video uses that as a classic example for cartridge filters.
It does.
But one of the woodworking studies you sent mentioned that
Uh-huh.
fine sawdust particles can be a real problem for worker health.
Oh, for sure.
So it raises the question,
Yeah.
is a standard cartridge filter enough?
Right. Or do they need something more?
This is where it gets really interesting.
I know, right?
The video mentions this thing called pulse jet cleaning for baghouses.
Yeah.
I had no idea what that meant until I read those reports.
It's a pretty cool system, actually.
It is. It's like this blast of compressed air that dislodges dust from the bags.
Powerful stuff.
So it makes sense why baghouses can handle those heavier loads.
Definitely.
But cartridge filters use compressed air for cleaning too, right?
They do, but it's not quite the same.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, cartridge filters typically use a much gentler pulse of air.
Okay,
They rely more on the pleats in the filter media to do the work.
interesting.
So while it's efficient for fine dust,
Yeah,
it might struggle with those larger, more stubborn particles,
makes sense.
which means more frequent cleaning and potentially faster filter replacement.
Okay, so this maintenance aspect is something to really think about.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the initial cost of the filter.
No.
It's about the long-term costs of keeping it running.
The total cost of ownership.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
Particle sizes, filter media cleaning methods.
Mm-hmm.
We even touched on those long-term maintenance costs.
It's all connected.
Where should we go from here?
Well, the video starts talking about space consideration.
Oh yeah, space is huge EE,
Literally.
especially on those factory floors.
Exactly.
So baghouse versus cartridge, who wins the space race?
That's a great question.
I'll have to unpack that in part 2.
Stay tuned. Welcome back.
So we left off talking about space,
We did.
which, let's face it, is a big deal.
It is, especially these days.
Right, those factory floors, they're not getting any bigger.
Not at all.
So this is where the whole baghouse versus cartridge thing gets really interesting.
Yeah, the design differences really come into play here.
Okay, so let's size them up.
Okay.
The video makes it pretty clear that baghouses are the heavyweights,
Literally.
literally.
Uh-huh.
But those reports you sent over,
Uh-huh.
they gave some really specific examples.
They did like that cement plant case study.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
They needed a baghouse system that could handle thousands of cubic feet of air per minute.
Per minute, yeah.
To handle that kind of volume, the baghouse unit itself was the size of a small house.
It was
A
massive.
house-sized filter. I can't even imagine trying to fit that into my garage.
Yeah, you'd need a pretty big garage.
That brings us to cartridge filters.
Right.
The video portrays them as the sleek, compact alternative.
They are much smaller.
And that electronics manufacturing report you shared
Mm-hmm.
showed how they were able to install a high-efficiency cartridge system
Yeah.
in a tiny little clean room.
Where a baghouse would have been impossible.
Exactly. So it seems like cartridge filters win the space race hands down.
In terms of the unit itself, yeah.
But there's got to be more to it than just the size of the filter.
Oh, there definitely is.
So what else should we be thinking about?
Well, remember we talked about those pulse jet cleaning systems for baghouses.
Uh-huh. Those powerful blasts of air.
Those require extra space
For
all the equipment, the tanks, the piping.
Oh, right.
And depending on the size of the system,
Yeah.
you might need walkways for maintenance and stuff.
Okay, so even if the baghouse unit itself isn't gigantic, the overall footprint can still be pretty significant.
Exactly. It's not just the filter, it's the whole system.
And that goes for cartridge filters too, right?
It does.
Because even though the units are compact,
Yeah.
you still need to factor in airflow.
That's a good point. We haven't really talked about the air itself.
We've been so focused on the dust.
Right, but the air is what carries the dust.
So how does that affect the space considerations?
Well, if you need to move large volumes of air, you're going to need bigger ductwork, bigger fans.
And that all takes up space.
Exactly.
So it's like a ripple effect.
It is.
Changing the filter type can have big implications for the rest of the system.
You got to think about it holistically.
Okay, so we've talked about space,
We have.
but there's another big factor we haven't really discussed.
Yeah.
Cost.
Oh, yes. Cost is always a big one.
Well,
The video kind of glosses over that.
it does.
But I know our listeners are going to want to know.
Of course.
So let's break it down. Baghouse versus cartridge. Who wins the cost battle?
It's not a simple answer.
I figured as much.
The initial cost comparison is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Cartridge filters generally have a lower upfront cost.
Especially for smaller systems.
Right.
That makes sense.
But the real story unfolds over time.
Okay, so what happens over time?
Remember we talked about those different cleaning mechanisms?
Pulse jets versus gentle pulses of air.
Right. Baghouse filters, they tend to last longer.
Because of those robust cleaning systems.
Exactly. But they also use more energy.
Those pulse jets aren't exactly energy efficient.
And that can add up over time?
So cartridge filters use less energy,
Generally, yes.
but they might need to be replaced more often.
That's the trade-off.
So it's like a tug of war between upfront costs and long-term operating expenses.
Exactly. And the winner of that tug of war depends entirely on your specific situation.
Your needs, your operating conditions.
All of that.
Okay, so there's no easy answer.
Not when it comes to cost.
It all comes back to that holistic approach.
It does. You need to consider everything.
Type of dust, the volume of air, the available space.
The upfront costs the operating expenses.
And we can't forget about the environmental impact.
Right. That's a big one these days.
The video barely scratches the surface of that.
It doesn't.
But those reports you shared,
Uh-huh.
they really dive into the details.
So let's shift gears
All right.
and talk about the environmental side of things.
Baghouse versus cartridge. Who's the eco-warrior?
Stay tuned for part 3 where we'll unpack all of that.
Welcome back for the final round
Round 3.
of our air filtration showdown.
Baghouse versus cartridge.
We've talked about everything from dust particles to factory floor space.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But now it's time to talk about the planet.
Yeah, the environmental impact.
This is something the video kind of glosses over.
It does.
But those reports you shared really got me thinking
About
the bigger picture, the long-term effects.
Absolutely. We can't ignore those.
The video mentions that baghouse filters use more energy, but it doesn't really explain why.
Well, it all comes down to those cleaning systems.
Those pulse jets
Like all that compressed air.
uses a lot of energy.
It does.
And more energy use means...
And a bigger carbon footprint.
Exactly. And then there's the waste from replacing those filters.
Oh, yeah, those big bags.
Bring a lot of waste.
They do.
So it seems like baghouses aren't exactly the eco-warriors.
Well, they do have some drawbacks in that area.
But the video makes cartridge filters sound pretty eco-friendly.
That can be.
But is that always the case?
It depends on a few things.
Like what?
Well, remember how cartridge filters can clog more easily with certain types of dust?
Right, from those reports.
If you're constantly replacing them,
Yeah.
that kind of negates the benefits.
More waste, more energy used in manufacturing and shipping.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
So even though cartridge filters are smaller and use less energy for cleaning,
Generally, yeah.
they might not always be the most eco-friendly choice.
Just a balancing act.
So no clear winner in the eco-friendly filter race.
Nope.
It all comes back to choosing the right tool for the job.
And understanding the impact of that choice.
Not just for efficiency,
Right.
but for the environment too.
Long-term sustainability.
And speaking of sustainability,
Yes.
I was really fascinated by that research on sustainable filter materials.
Oh, yeah, there's some cool stuff happening there.
Like bamboo filters and hemp filters.
Those are just the beginning.
There's so many new innovations.
That's really exciting.
So it's not just about reducing the negative impact.
No.
It's about creating filters that are inherently eco-friendly.
From the ground up.
That brings us to the biggest takeaway from our deep dive.
What's that?
There's no magic bullet.
Nope.
No one-size-fits-all solution.
Every situation is unique.
It's about understanding your needs.
Your dusting, your space, your budget.
And making informed decisions.
For your operation and for the planet.
Well, there you have it, folks.
That's a wrap.
Baghouse versus Cartridge.
The ultimate air filtration showdown.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive.
We sure did.
And that you learned a thing or two about keeping your air clean.
And keeping our planet healthy.
Until next time, happy filtering, everyone.